You trudge through thigh-high drifts as the station's neon halo shivers against the heavy curtain of falling snow. The wind whistles, carrying the hollow cadence of a faraway train, horn an almost surgical silence that numbs your senses before the storm's rumble even arrives. You're listening to 102 Hours where stories don't just get told, they come alive in the dark. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to 102 Hours, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let 102 Hours guide you into tonight's journey. It's the evening of February 15th, 1976. You step onto the slick pavement of a lone gas station on Telegraph Road in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. The world feels fragile here 10 years after the Lindbergh baby kidnapping reminded the nation that no corner of suburbia is immune to horror. You see 10-year-old Mark Stebbins in a blue parka, his breath swirling like mist under the flickering fluorescent canopy. He fumbles with a coin for the payphone perched beside an ancient pump, entirely unaware that he's about to become the nightmare's first name. By the mid-1970s, fingerprint databases were expanding, though DNA testing remained a distant dream. You notice the station attendant's flashlight beam cutting through the flakes, illuminating each snowflake like a tiny, frozen star. Historical records show that child abduction investigations then relied heavily on eyewitness sketches and neighborhood canvases, painstaking process susceptible to human error. Investigators still question whether modern forensic breakthroughs would have unraveled this case before it began. You shift your weight, the crunch of your boots lost beneath the wind's howl. A rusty sedan idles near the pumps, its engine ticking as it cools. The driver's side door is slightly ajar, as though someone dashed away in haste. You peer into the darkness beyond the station's perimeter where trees stand like silent sentinels, guarding secrets that the wind refuses to carry. A distant engine roar crescendos, then fades. You're struck by how sound behaves in a storm, muffled yet distorted, like echoes from another dimension. It's here, in that warped acoustic space, that you hear it, a faint metallic click, barely audible. Your heart thunders, a primal alarm you can't silence. Mark fumbles with the phone. You want to call out, warn him, but your voice is trapped beneath the oppressive hush. The attendant glances over his shoulder, then returns his attention to the bay. You sense movement, a flutter of dark fabric slipping behind the pumps. Without warning, the overhead lights flicker and die, plunging you into a void broken only by the gas station's emergency bulbs, casting elongated shadows. Investigators later noted that witnesses described a nasal whistle in that moment, a detail so odd it was omitted from initial reports. Fringe theories suggest the killer mimicked carnival barkers to disarm children who dared to approach. You press your back against the cold metal of a pump, your breath quickening. Suddenly, the attendant's voice cuts through the storm. Mark. His flashlight sweeps the lot in an arc too slow, too casual. The beam lands on an empty expanse of snow where footprints end near the payphone. A single red jacket lies crumpled at the pump's base, a beacon against the pristine drifts. You step forward and crouch, brushing aside snow to expose its full form. It's unmistakably Mark's jacket. Red nylon, battered at the seams, a zipper pull engraved with a tiny rocket ship. A smear of bright blue lint adheres to the cuffed inner fibers, destined to become one of the case's most curious forensic clues. You recall how the Zodiac case in California relied on similar minutiae handwriting. Analysis, ballistic matching, yet here, in suburban Detroit, those same methods would soon hit dead ends. Investigators still question whether a single perpetrator used multiple vehicle types to confuse witnesses, or if more than one individual was involved. Sirens slice through the night as patrol cars breach the storm. Tires spinning on the icy road, you rise to your feet, snow clinging to your boots, and slip past the idling sedan's shadowed form. Glancing back, you see nothing but the stationary pump and the attendant's flashlight beam dancing futilely across the lot. Your mind races. What happened in the seconds between that metallic click and the attendant's call? You imagine hands gloved, efficient yanking Mark into a waiting vehicle. Perhaps the killer used tranquilizers, as some fringe rumors hold, leaving the boy alive but incapacitated, carried off to a hidden den. You swallow hard. Modern armchair detectives often compare this case to the Yorkshire Ripper investigation, where link analysis faltered and suspects slipped through the cracks. Yet in Oakland County, the stakes felt even more personal. You tuck that thought away and focus on the present. A patrol car's headlights sweep across the forecourt. Two officers leap out, flashlights drawn. You watch as they converge on the discarded jacket. One officer murmurs into his radio, voice tight with urgency. The other steps back, shaking his head. They confer, but you catch only fragments. No sign of him. Footprints stop here, must ove. You realize you're shivering, more from adrenaline than cold. For a moment, time suspends. The snow falls slower, each flake an exclamation. Mark against the dark sky. Then the wind roars again, and the moment shatters. The officers expand their search, their lights crisscrossing like lasers through the storm. You turn away and head toward the tree line, following the faintest trail of tracks leading into the pines. Each step feels heavy, weighted with dread. You emerge into a small clearing where the tree's branches bend under snow's weight. A lone, snow-laden toy car lies half buried at your feet, red paint chipped, its wheels frozen still. You kneel and brush the snow off its roof. A tiny crack in the plastic reveals a handprint darker than the rest of print that would later confound experts because it didn't match any family member. You rise and look back at the gas station's halogen glow. Now a distant beacon swallowed by the pelting snow. No one calls your name. No one witnesses what you're about to do next. In the hush, you take a deep breath, steeling yourself to follow those tracks deeper into the pines, to the darkness waiting just beyond the edge of light. You follow the yellow crime scene taped down Telegraph Road, the wind's edge still biting at your cheeks even after you've left the gas station behind. Tire tracks forged parallel scars through the snow, and your boots crunch in sync with the prognostic drumbeat of distant sirens. Ahead, police floodlights carve geometric shapes into the gloom, illuminating a small, frozen fragment half buried at the road's shoulder. A sleeve cuff from Mark's red jacket, it's bright nylon dulled by ice. You crouch, fingers numbed, and lift the cuff. The snow falls in slow motion, each flake whispering secrets as it lands and vanishes. In 1939, the FBI officially began compiling fingerprint records nationwide, yet here, 40 years later, those fingerprints still offered more hope than DNA ever could. You brush the cuff against your gloved cheek, feeling the stiff resin of a hurried tear. This tiny vestige is the first clue that the boy didn't wander off. He was taken. Investigators still question whether the killer slipped off the main highway or backed into a hidden driveway. But the threadbare cuff suggests an abduction executed with clinical precision. Fringe reports claim local hunters heard a dog whistle that night, an oddly specific detail never mentioned in official transcripts. You tuck the cuff into an evidence bag and glance up at the dark pines lining the road. Their branches bowed under the snow's weight, as if crushed by collective grief. Behind you, a detective in a charcoal overcoat speaks into a radio. His voice cracks like static. "We got cuff at 50-yard mark. Sending 4 K9 unit." You stand and pace the icy verge, eyes tracing the faint indentation of a tire track veering off into the woods. The patrolman nods toward you and mumbles, "Stay clear of the tree line. Mamor, Mr. Is." Uncertainty makes your spine crawl. In the mid-1970s, crime scene photography was elevated to an art form. Investigators used large format cameras to document every angle, every speck of evidence. You remember reading how the Lindbergh investigation employed more than 2,000 photographs to catalogue the crime scene miles from the victim's home. Here, in Oakland County, they snapped dozens of shots of that single cuff, layering each image with numbered markers like a macabre storyboard. You step back as the K9 team arrives, the dog's fur flecked with snow. The animal pauses at the cuff, sniffs once, then charges toward the forest opening. A cluster of officers scrambles after it, flashlights bobbing like fireflies in convalescent light. You swallow, feeling the cold thud of your heart in your throat. What secrets wait beyond those trees? A forensic technician in a blue jumpsuit squats beside your footprints and runs a white-gloved finger through the snow. He holds up a plastic vial containing a few flecks of crimson-dried blood, freeze-fractured by winter's grip. You gaze at the vial, astonished at how minuscule drops can redirect an entire investigation. There's an odd hush in his movements, a reverence for this fragile artifact. Breathe a sentence. You turn your head to watch snow drift down in slow, lazy spirals, offering a momentary calm amid the frenetic energy of the investigation. The technician nods to the detective, then straightens. This could be marks, or it could be animal. We'll test. You watch him seal the vial. In the late 60s, forensic labs began using serology tests to differentiate human and animal blood, an innovation borrowed from military field medicine. Decades later, that basic test might still be the key here. You notice the detective crouching near the tree line, pulling aside a curtain of branches to reveal the edge of a muddy trail. He plucks a single, pale blue fiber from a twig, almost invisible against the dark bark. He holds it up against his flashlight, a synthetic strand that matches the lint you saw on the jacket's cuff. They bag it, too. Each faux insignificant scrap catalogued with obsessive care. Investigators still question whether that fiber originated from a homemade blanket found in a suspect's abandoned trailer-run item that later mysteriously vanished. From evidence storage, the thought makes you shiver. You lean against the patrol car, its door ajar, and catch your reflection in the side mirror, pale, wide-eyed, every bit a participant in this nightmare. Above you, the sky churns with roiling clouds. The street lamp at the forest's edge flickers, guttering like a candle before its final breath. You step forward, driven by a compulsion you can't name, and follow the path where the K9 unit raced off. Each step sinks into the half-frozen mud beneath a thin layer of snow. Your boots track invisible patterns that you'll never trace back, but that the dog will dot suddenly. The dog stops dead ahead, nose buried in the snow. You hear its low growler rumble of unease. You freeze, breath clouding, an inch closer. There, half submerged, lies a battered lunchbox decorated with cartoon astronauts, its paint chipped and rusted. You pick it up, the metal edge biting into your glove. It's heavier than you expect. Inside, nothing but snow and a few tarnished pennies. But the lunchbox's hinge bears a faint scrawl in black marker Koji des 75 avus. Investigators later theorized this was a red herring, an early false lead, connecting a Japanese-American boy who moved away years earlier. But at the time, it set off a frenzy of interviews with former neighbors. Investigators still question whether that scrawl was a cruel joke or the killer's calling card. You close the lunchbox, exhaling a breath you didn't realize you were holding. The detective kneels beside you, offering a gloved hand. Good find, he says, voice low. You nod, though your head is spinning. Every discovery here feels like another puzzle piece, only to be shattered by conflicting leads. Breathe a sentence. You momentarily allow yourself to watch the dog circle another patch of disturbed snow, the canine's fur sending plumes of powder into the chill air. Then you remember why you're here. The casket thin margin between life and death. Marshals sweep the clearing, marking tree trunks with neon chalk. You realize the forest has no respect for lines drawn by investigators. Snow masks footprints as quickly as they form. The wind erases sound just as deftly. Night deepens. The hum, and the tape flutters in the wind like a restless spirit. You rub your arms, goosebumps prickling beneath your coat. The evidence tent stands 10 yards ahead, a makeshift shrine to the science of crime. You approach slowly, the muted clack of your boots, a metronome counting down inside. A technician unrolls a photographic key, aligning each image with its numbered scene marker. Jacket cuff, Exhibit A, blood flecks, Exhibit B, fiber strand, Exhibit C, the lunchbox, Exhibit D. You trace their order with your finger hovering above the laminated sheet. This is where a child's disappearance transforms into a hunt for a monster. Investigators still question whether the pattern of evidence reflects a single perpetrator's evolving ritual or multiple copycats mimicking earlier crimes. The thought swells in your mind like a storm cloud, ready to burst. You step back and exhale, feeling the cold air burn your lungs. The tense yellow glow fades as you withdraw, leaving the artifacts behind. Outside, the dog's bark snaps you back to reality. You turn to see the canine staring at you, tail stiff, as if daring you to follow further. You hesitate only a moment, then slide the cuff's evidence bag into your coat pocket. The detective gives you a tight nod. It's time to move on to chase every thread, every fiber, into the darkness where the killer still hides. You walk down Maplewood Drive, once a postcard of suburban tranquility, now scarred by unblinking door-to-door TV cameras and swarms of jittery neighbors pressing against their frosted windows. Every front porch holds a folding chair. Every mailbox wears a loop of yellow, ribbon symbols of community defiance against a terror that has proven it can reach inside even the most locked-down homes. You pass a cluster of women whispering beside a station wagon. Their breaths fog the air as they compare notes on suspicious cars and unfamiliar faces, their eyes darting like startled deer. It's March 1976, just weeks after Mark Stebbins vanished. And the phrase child killer has been scrawled on every bulletin board from Pontiac to Royal Oak. Historic patterns show that communal fear in serial crime locales often spirals into moral panic. Recall the fervor in Atlanta during the 1915 phantom lynchings, but here, it's tinted with frostbite and the harsh glow of Kmart parking lots. Investigators still question whether this frenetic vigilance helped funnel critical tips or only drowned the police in false alarms. You push past a yard sign reading, "Protect our children." Its chipped wooden letters festooned with snow. A homeowner pops out from behind a snowbank, arms laden with milk and bread. She locks eyes with you and raises a finger to her lips before slipping indoors. You shiver, sensing the weight of her unspoken plea, "Be silent, be watchful." On a nearby lawn, a hastily painted banner declares "No stranger knows our paths." Beneath it, a young boy pedals his bike in circles, backlit by the pink haze of a setting sun. He glances up at your reflection in a picture window, your dark silhouette framed by swaying icicles, and pedals faster, as if fleeing the very idea of this nightmarish threat. In the mid-20th century, community watch programs had their roots in wartime neighborhood patrols, but the Oakland County watches of '76 felt more like trench-lined barricades. You notice homeowners arming themselves with binoculars and walkie-talkies, gadgets more suited to hunters than parents. A volunteer patrol convenes at the corner. Their orange safety vests almost glow against the gathering dusk. You catch snippets. "Did you see that station wagon again? I heard glass break over on Woodward. Keep your kids inside after 5. Investigators still question whether such ad hoc militias deterred the killer or simply drove him deeper into the shadows, choosing quieter back roads and unmonitored clearings. Fringe chatter posits that he reveled in this spotlight, his ego fed by the orchestration of suburban hysteria. You imagine his perspective, every locked door a personal affront, every set of eyes a challenge to be broken. Breathe a sentence. You pause on a stoop to catch your breath, the icy air filling your lungs like shards of glass, and watch a snowflake land on your glove, melt, then vanish. A car door slams 2 houses down. A man in a parka strides toward you, jaw clenched. He holds up a Polaroid grainy, black and white snapped from someone's front yard camera. In the blurry image, a dark figure crouches behind a hedge, face obscured. "Found this on my porch," he mutters, voice low. "Saw him there last night, I swear." He thrusts the photo into your hand. The figure's shape could be any adult trick of shadow or the corner of a child's imagination. Yet you feel the hairs on your neck stand up. Historical accounts note that after the Cleveland torso murders in the 1930s, similar photographs circulated in local pubs, fueling legends of the butcher's ghost. Here, in modern Michigan, the grainy Polaroid becomes both talisman and curse. Investigators still question whether these community-captured images held any real value or simply amplified fear, prompting more hoaxes than actual leads. You hand the Polaroid back, and the man lowers his eyes. "I'm sorry, just watch yourself." He slips away, muttering about neighborhood watches and mayoral meetings. You tuck the photo into your coat pocket, sliding it onto your chest, like a second skin, an artifact of communal paranoia. Along the sidewalk, homemade flyers flutter on lampposts. Have you seen her? Beneath a black and white sketch of Jill Robinson, the 10-year-old who vanished 2 weeks after Mark. Her wide eyes stare out at you, pleading. You touch the flyer gently, its paper brittle with damp, and press it against a neighboring post to keep it from blowing away. A group of teen volunteers from the local church patrols the intersection, clipboards in hand. They count every passing car, noting license plate numbers with meticulous strokes. You approach, and one girl offers. You, a paper pencil, want to help. You politely decline, stepping back into the gathering gloom. Their earnest faces betray exhaustion-y scrutiny of passing strangers etched into creased brows. Investigators still question whether reliance on civilian volunteers compromised scene integrity. Some tips directed police to houses where residents were away, leaving homes unwatched and exploitable. The irony wasn't lost on you. In trying to safeguard children, the community built its own blind spots. Breathe a sentence. You walk past a garden gnome, its ceramic face cracked, semi-buried in snow, an eerie sentinel whose frozen grin feels more menacing than comforting. At the corner, a cluster of journalists huddles beneath a press canopy sprayed with the radio station's logo. Reporters flip through their notebooks, eyes alight with deadline adrenaline. A cameraman adjusts his lens to capture a neighbor gesturing wildly toward the woods. In 1976, media frenzy around serial crimes was ramping up thanks to the Manson family trials and the Son of Sam investigation, which often forced police to manage PR as much as evidence. You slip past, sensing the swarm's pull like a magnet, desperate for a story over substance. Yet under that fluorescent canopy, you catch a glimpse of a makeshift map littered with colored pins, each one marking a disappearance or sighting. The clustering along Telegraph and Woodward glows ominously. Investigators still question whether the media coverage hindered or helped the hunt. Some detectives argued the spotlight toppled leads into public scavenger hunts, while others credit national attention for the dozens of tips they eventually pursued. You shove the mental map aside, reminding yourself that every colored pin represents a terrified family and a vanished child. Night tightens. The porch lights in the quiet houses flicker on, then cast long beams across the street. You step beneath one such light and pause. The warmth of the bulb does little to chase away the cold. You lean against the post, listen to the howl of the wind whipping through empty yards, and feel the community's collective heartbeat in the darkness. This neighborhood, once a sleepy tableau of picket fences and barbecue smoke, now pulses with the jittery rhythm of survival. You inhale, tasting the sharp tang of fear baked into the night air. As you exhale, you whisper into the void. We're all watching, but who's watching over us? The sky seems heavy over Royal Oak, heavier than it has any right to be. Maybe it's just your shoulders carrying the weight of what's happened again. Another child, another murder. Jill Robinson, 11 years old, shot in the face and left on the side of I-75 like discarded refuse. You don't forget that kind of violence, not in a town like this. Not twice in less than a year. You blink against the drizzle, even though it's not really raining. Just mist rising from the asphalt. You try not to think about how long she was missing for days. For days where her parents thought maybe she'd run away. Maybe she was hiding at a friend's house. But no. Jill never made it past that stretch of highway. Her bike was found the day after she disappeared, neatly parked at the back of a local store. Neatly. That word clings to the back of your throat like something wrong. Who parks a bike like that unless they're planning to come back? Police canvass the area, quickly, door to door, flashlight to flashlight. Dogs, volunteers, aerial sweeps, the full force of suburban alarm. But she'd been gone by then. Gone. And silenced. What makes Jill's case different from Mark Stebbins, beyond the method of killing, is the precision. There's something deliberate in her death. Mark was strangled. Jill was executed. And that line between intention and rage sends a cold ripple through your gut. Investigators note how there are no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no sounds, as if she vanished in the vacuum between store hours and bedtime. You walk through the timeline. She had a fight with her mom, an argument about dinner. She left in a rush. Kids storm out sometimes. That doesn't mean they never come back. But Jill never even made it past the first curve of her own freedom. Her body was found near Big Beaver Road, still wearing the same clothes she had on when she disappeared. The only new addition, a clean shot to the head. The kind of precision that doesn't feel like chance. You try not to picture it. The way her body must have slumped, or how long she lay there before someone noticed. And now, for the first time, the press starts whispering the word. Serial, 2 dead kids, 2 suburban disappearances, no signs of sexual assault. Clean, calm, almost surgical. These weren't crimes of opportunity. Someone was planning this. You sit with the detectives in that narrow conference room. The wallpaper is peeling, and the coffee tastes like metal. A map of Oakland County is pinned to the wall, red strings stretching from Birmingham to Royal Oak. Someone even marked Jill's last known footsteps with small green tacks, a different color from Mark's. They don't want to mix up the cases yet, but you can feel if they're connected. Somehow, here's where it starts to fracture. The police departments aren't talking to each other. At least not clearly. Royal Oak has their way. Berkeley has theirs. And the Oakland County Sheriff's Office, well, they've got pride to protect. Each wants to believe the killer isn't lurking in their district. That maybe it's just a coincidence. But you know better. You always do. And then, the behavioral analyst steps into the room. Young guy, big glasses, speaks softly but moves with the certainty of someone who knows he'll be ignored. He talks about signature behavior, about how neatness in a crime scene can sometimes be more dangerous than chaos. That neatness means ritual. He leans forward and says, "Whoever did this isn't done." You look around the room. No one breathes. You realize no one has since he walked in. And maybe this is where the air gets tight, where a town becomes a hunting ground. Kids stop riding bikes after dark. Parents start driving their children 2 blocks to school. Every car that passes by a park gets a second glance. Jill's funeral is small. Her father refuses to speak to reporters. Her mother, well, she doesn't stop shaking, not even during the prayers. And you, standing in the back, can't stop wondering what the killer is doing right now. Watching the news, reading the obits, smiling. This is where history leaves its first real blood smear. Michigan hadn't seen something like this before. Not since the 1930s, Lindbergh. Baby case. Had there been so much attention on a child murder in the US, but this one felt methodical, contemporary. The modern monster doesn't break windows. He smiles and holds the door. There's a theory floated, not official, of course, that maybe this person's a cop, or at least pretends to be one. Kids don't just get into strangers' cars unless there's trust, or authority, or both. But theories are like smoke rings in a wind tunnel. They vanish before they land. You check the case file again. The lab results on the bike come back clean, no prints, no fibers, no hairs, just silence. That perfect, terrifying silence again. The investigators still question whether Jill was killed the same night she disappeared, or if she was held somewhere like Mark then dumped. There's no definitive sign of captivity, no ligature marks, no bruising, but the lack of evidence almost feels staged. And then there's that fringe rumor, whispered mostly, that Jill's case triggered something else. A copycat, a partner, or maybe someone who just wanted in on the spotlight. A known prisoner later claimed knowledge of the crime, but his timeline didn't hold, and his stories twisted like wet rope. Still, the detail he mentioned, the parking lot, the bike placement, was just a little too specific. Investigators dismissed him. You're not so sure. So, you stand in the middle of that room, map behind you, theories in the air, and something cold presses against your spine. It's not just the case, it's the feeling that someone is watching the investigation, unfolding, enjoying every second of it. You step into the makeshift headquarters of the Woodward Corridor Task Force, a cavernous gymnasium repurposed with folding tables, buzzing fluorescent lights, and walls plastered with maps dotted in multicolored pins. The air hums with hushed conversations, the clack of typewriter keys, and the low drone of police radios chattering across frequencies. It's April 1976, and suburban Detroit is now ground zero for the largest child murder investigation in Michigan history. You weave between detectives in trench coats and lab technicians in starched white coats, each absorbed in evidence boards that resemble war room strategy displays. In 1935, the FBI established its first statewide crime lab in Massachusetts, setting a precedent for centralized forensic support. But this task force marks one of the first times Michigan pooled municipal, county, and state resources under one roof. You pause beneath a flickering light, feeling its uneven rhythm echo in your pulse. On one wall, a timeline stretches from February to April, listing abduction dates, recovery sites, and autopsy findings. Next to it, a list of suspects grows by the day, often erased, scribbled over, then rewritten. Fringe gossip holds that the killer taunted authorities by leaving cryptic postcards addressed to the governor, although no such postcards ever appeared. In official records, investigators still question whether those rumored notes were ever mailed, or simply whispers spread by anxious rumors. Breathe a sentence. You inhale the dry scent of powder blue evidence tags and let your shoulders drop for a moment. At the center table, you see beat-up filing boxes spilling with interview transcripts on wire hangers, handwritten statements from neighbors, gas station attendants, and schoolmates. You lift one folder and skim a statement from a mechanic who serviced a suspicious blue sedan in early March. His description, a single scratch along the passenger door, matched marks found on Jill Robinson's abandoned bicycle. That connection ignited a week of stakeouts, yet no one ever saw the car again. In a corner, a hulking metal safe stands open, its interior lined with padded compartments for evidence. You step closer and spot Mark's red jacket, now wrapped in plastic and labeled Exhibit A1. Next to it, Jill's pink scarf sits taut between metal clasps as Exhibit B3. A lab tech in rubber gloves holds up a small vial of blue fiber fragments, letting them glint in the overhead light like scattered stars. Historical records show that by the mid-1970s, task forces was still a relatively novel concept. Most earlier serial crime probes remained siloed within local jurisdictions, hampering information sharing across county lines. The task force here broke that mold, centralizing detectives from at least 7 agencies. You can almost feel the tension of egos vying for control, the unspoken competition to catch the killer first. Investigators still question whether turf wars delayed critical decisions or forced evidence processing to circle back and forth between labs, costing precious time. You imagine a forensic technician in Lansing waiting on Detroit analysts to clear samples, while clues froze in limbo like droplets caught in ice. Breathe a sentence. You glance at a portrait of President Ford hanging incongruously above a whiteboard, his stoic gaze surveying the chaos below. At another table, a pair of criminologists pore over early behavioral profiles, scrawling hypotheses about the killer's age, occupation, and possible mental state. One sketch shows a tall man in his 30s, meticulous in routine, with a penchant for suburban gas stations and payphones. The idea echoes the profile techniques first refined during the Colorado serial rape cases of the late 1960s. Investigators still question whether these early profiles applied here or misplaced focus onto the wrong demographic. You inch closer to hear them debate. He's organized, methodical, but could he also be a drifter passing through Oakland County? A voice counters, but the consistent modus operandi: abduct at night, deposit bodies in snowy ditches suggests territorial knowledge. The theorist's words hang in the air like smoke, dissipating before you can grasp a final conclusion. On the far wall, a massive roadmap of Michigan is staked with yellow, red, and blue flags. Each color denotes a victim's last known location or potential sighting. You run a finger along the yellow pins, marking Mark's disappearance. Then follow the blue pins for Jill. The pins form a rough semicircle stretching from Bloomfield Township to Royal Oak, nearby. Someone has scrawled in red marker, maybe more, breather, sentence. You close your eyes for a second, letting the noisy room recede, and taste the metallic tang of adrenaline. You move toward a corner curtained off for fingerprint analysis. Inside, an AFIS machine hums a bulky apparatus the size of a small refrigerator. Its green CRT screen scrolling through prints. At that moment in history, the FBI had processed over 1 million fingerprint records nationwide, yet this machine could only access Michigan's subset. You watch an investigator slide a fingerprint card into the reader, hoping for a match that never comes. Investigators still question whether the killer's prints ever entered any database, or, if deliberate, countermeasures like wearing gloves rendered this technology moot. It's said he switched vehicles multiple times to evade detection, each change a calculated move in his deadly game. Back at the center table, you notice a ledger documenting every tip, phone call hundreds poured in daily, flooding operators, who typed each one into unwieldy 3-ring binders. One entry reads, "Woman claims to see blue sedan at midnight on Woodward, eastbound." Another, "Strange man humming near school playground." Those calls sparked countless drives into the night that ended in empty streets. You pick up the ledger and flip through pages, each line a testament to frantic hope. Then you realize the entry dates cluster every few days, matching newspaper headlines but rarely matching credible leads. You replace the ledger with reverence. Breathe a sentence. You rest your palm against the table, feeling its wood grain beneath your glove, and watch dust motes swirl in a stray beam of light. At the edge of the gym, crime scene photographers develop Polaroids in a makeshift darkroom tent, their red safe lights glowing like a heartbeat. You step inside and inhale the sweet chemical sting of developer fluid. Prints dangle from a wire, the images emerging slowly. Mark's jacket cuff, Jill's scarf, a smear of dark fluid on the ground. Each photo is a frozen confession that demands interpretation. A photographer glances up. Every snapshot could be the clue that cracks this. But sometimes it's just snow. You nod, understanding the weight of that uncertainty. Investigators still question whether focusing on photographic evidence diverted resources from witness interviews and whether those interviews, in turn, might have yielded more fruitful leads. You back out of the tent and return to the open floor, where piles of case files now tower like miniature skyscrapers. The noise greets you again: the radios, the typewriters, the low hum of desperate minds at work. You brush a stray hair from your forehead and consider your next move. Outside, the spring thaw is already beginning to wash away footprints, evidence slipping through the mull of snowmelt. Inside this room, however, nothing escapes notice. Every fiber, every smudge, every whispered theory is catalogued, debated, and cross-referenced. This is the heart of the hunt where science, intuition, and human will converge to chase a predator still lurking just beyond reach. You take one last look at the pinned map, the AFIS machine, and the vast sea of binders. Then, steeling yourself, you step back into the corridor, ready to dive deeper into a case that refuses to yield its secrets. You blink at the list again. Every detail is chilling, but one thing in particular gnaws at your nerves: the precision. You've seen enough disorganized horror in headlines before, but this is different. These aren't the frantic acts of a deranged mind spiraling in chaos. These are surgical, every move calculated, every aftermath sterile. Take Timothy King, the last known victim. You remember reading the coroner's report. The boy's stomach had traces of fried chicken, suggesting he was fed his favorite meal just before his death. It wasn't a lucky guess. Whoever did this had learned what Timmy liked, maybe asked around, maybe even got close enough to charm someone into revealing it. The thought alone is like swallowing broken glass. This kind of control, it's rare, and it points to something darker than rage. This isn't someone snapping. This is someone hunting. You pace quietly through the archived materials, your fingers gliding along the faded labels. King Stebbins, Robinson, Mihalik, every folder heavier than the last. But then, you stop. Not because of a new clue, but because of a pattern. Each child was abducted in a public space. A parking lot, a street corner, a small store. But no one ever saw anything useful. No screams, no struggle, no commotion. It's as if the children simply stepped into thin air. That raises a terrifying question. Were they lured, or did they go willingly? You look again at the victim profiles. All well-mannered, cautious, smart enough to know about stranger danger, which only makes one possibility more plausible. This wasn't a stranger at all. Theories about the perpetrator's psychology bloomed like weeds during the height of the case. Profile after profile painted him as organized, intelligent, clean, likely employed, likely blending in, possibly even someone the children already knew: a teacher, coach, clergy, or family friend. But you steer away from those theories tonight. You're not here to psychoanalyze from the comfort of hindsight. You're here to walk where the evidence goes, and that trail is cold, but not empty. Start with the hair, animal hairs actually, found on several of the victims' clothing. They didn't match any pets owned by the children or their families. But under scrutiny, they revealed something else, a possible shared location. Somewhere, multiple victims had been possibly held long enough to pick up the same trace fibers and hairs. Then there's the peculiar detail of their grooming. All victims were bathed, nails cleaned, hair trimmed or brushed. Not sloppily, but neatly, with care, with intent. It was almost ritualistic. You picture the bathroom sink again, a child's small face reflected in a mirror, forced to sit still, combed, clipped, washed by someone who doesn't rush, someone who wants them to look perfect. There's an old phrase from criminal profiling: organized predators create a fantasy, disorganized ones destroy reality. You're starting to think this killer was trying to do both. Investigators at the time floated the theory that the grooming was meant to cleanse, not just physically, but symbolically, as if the killer had a warped code of conduct, that these children, though stolen, were to be treated with a strange kind of respect, not spared, but not defiled either. One particularly eerie speculation suggested the killer might have believed he was preserving innocence, rather than extinguishing it, a delusion perhaps twisted enough to justify his actions to himself. But again, you pull yourself back from speculation. You promised you wouldn't drift. You returned to what's verifiable. Autopsy reports noted a narrow time window in which the children were likely killed, usually within hours of being last seen. But then their bodies weren't found until days, even weeks later, which means they were kept somewhere, held, fed, groomed, dressed, and then left, always in public spaces, as if meant to be found, as if the killer wanted them seen, maybe to send a message, or maybe because he wanted credit. You shiver. Most serial offenders seek control. Some seek power, others seek notoriety. This killer, he seemed to seek legacy, and that legacy began seeping into the public psyche faster than anyone expected. Parents in Oakland County began enforcing strict curfews. Malls emptied. Bike rides stopped. Even school drop-offs became anxious rituals. You can still smell the paranoia, clinging like gasoline to everything in the air. News anchors dubbed the killer the babysitter because of the way he cared for the kids in captivity. It was supposed to be ironic, but something about the name stuck. And maybe, deep down, it reflected the horror more accurately than people wanted to admit. Investigators still question whether that nickname empowered the killer, whether giving him a persona, not just a title, fueled the fire, whether by naming the shadow they'd made it feel more real, more permanent. One fact buried in a forgotten local report stood out to you in 3 of the cases. The victims were addressed after death in clothes different from what they wore when abducted. Clean shirts, pressed pants, new socks, clothes not bought by their families. Who buys clothes for children they don't know? Who has the time, the space, and the desire to make sure a victim's body looks presentable? It's not just the act, it's the performance. You step back from the files now. You're not out of the dark yet, but you're closer to seeing what the dark wants you to see. You slip the dossier marked B3 into your satchel and step through the swinging doors of the Bloomfield Township Police Station, where the pungent aroma of disinfectant mingles with stale coffee. A clerk glances up and offers a curt nod before returning to the endless loop of phone tip-ins. It's Christine Mihilik's birthday, April 8th, 1976, and you can't shake the notion that this date, meant for celebration, has been hijacked by dread. By the mid-1960s, juvenile crime prevention programs had begun sprouting nationwide. Kids were taught to avoid strangers, to duck and cover during air raid drills, and to memorize parent phone numbers by age 7. Yet, in Oakland County, such measures felt as threadbare as a forgotten birthday card. Investigators still question whether more rigorous school-based safety training might have thwarted Christine's fate. You push through the station's bullpen, where detectives hover over wooden desks littered with case files. One officer looks up and flicks a folded photograph across the table. You catch it before it lands. It's a Polaroid of Christine, curly hair caught in a sunbeam, her grin bright under a party hat. You study it, tracing the joy in her eyes, then glance at the calendar on the wall today. "Happy birthday, Christine," you whisper, voice barely audible amid the hum of fluorescent lighting. You fold the photo and slip it into your pocket, pressing it against your thigh like a keepsake proof that this little girl once radiated laughter. The sergeant rises from his chair and beckons you to a back office. A map of northern Oakland County covers one wall, peppered with pushpins and colored twine connecting each disappearance. Mark's station, Jill's playground, and now Christine's abduction site near a phone booth in Pontiac form a jagged triangle. The sergeant jabs a finger at the third point. Here, you recall the photo in yesterday's newspaper. Christine standing at that very booth, dressed in a sundress, clutching a quarter for the payphone. She was on her way to a friend's sleepover, no more than a 10-minute walk. You can almost feel her small hand pressing buttons, the clack of the ancient rotary dial echoing in your mind. Fringe whispers suggest the booth's handset emitted distorted audio voices, garbled as if filtered through a warped transistor radio supposedly, luring children closer to investigate. No official record ever notes static or malfunction, but you can't ignore the rumor. Investigators still question whether a tampered phone line served as a sinister beacon for unsuspecting kids. Breather. Sentence. You rub your temples, recalling the hush in the air when a child's laugh vanishes too soon. The sergeant hands you a yellowed witness statement. Neighbor heard her humming happy birthday, then nothing. You read the single sentence, typed on brittle paper, and imagine Christine's soft voice singing into the void. The statement's margins bear frantic handwritten notes. 9:45 p.m. Wind strong, air temp 38. Even the weather became part of the record. You exit the office and cross the lobby to the evidence room, where Christine's belongings await analysis. The steel door clangs shut behind you, muffling the station's clamor. Inside, a wooden locker labeled Exhibit C stands open. You pause before it, inhaling the sterile chill, then carefully lift its contents onto a stainless steel table. A worn denim jacket, a single Mary Jane shoe coated in mud, and a plastic shopping bag bearing a grocery store logo. Historical records indicate that by 1975, most grocery chains began deploying plastic checkout bags emblazoned with store names. A boon for crime scene linkage if patrons carried them home. Yet here, this bag's logo faded after months of wear, obscuring which location Christine visited before her disappearance. Investigators still question whether the bag came from a nearby Kroger or a defunct Stop and Go, and whether that detail could have placed her steps on a critical axis toward her abductor. You lift the denim jacket and spread it across the table. The collar is frayed, the seams stiff with salt from the road. A single yellow thread dangles from the cuff-an anomaly compared to the cotton weave of the rest of the garment. You clamp on a pair of latex gloves and snip the thread, depositing it into an envelope marked fiber analysis. This tiny thread could match something in the killer's lore, be dismissed as a common scrap from local seamstresses. Next, you pick up the Mary Jane shoe and spin it in your gloved hand. The sole bears one deep cutter triangular gouge, matching the scrap on Jill's bicycle. You trace the edge with a fingertip. The pattern is unmistakable, the same rusty bear trap teeth motif. Investigators still question whether that tool served as the killer's signature or if someone else left it there to mislead the probe. Breathe a sentence. You step back and close your eyes, letting the metal table's cold surface anchor you to the moment. The door opens, and a young forensic photographer enters, balancing a Polaroid and its flash cube. She sets up the shot and captures Christine's jacket in harsh white light, the latex gloves clicking as she adjusts the lens. You watch the image develop blue denim against aluminum, each grain of fabric, emerging like a clue demanding respect in the late 1960s. Instant photography transformed field documentation by allowing on-the-spot verification. But researchers noted that flash glare could obscure fine details. Here, the photographer tilts the jacket to minimize reflection, then snaps again. Investigators still question whether too many retakes might have contaminated evidence with ambient fibers or oils. You pocket the Polaroid and follow the photographer down a narrow hallway to the serology lab, where a technician holds up 2 vials of reddish residue scraped from the shoe's insole. One vial carries a clear latex membrane stain, likely human blood, while the other appears murky, tinged green with decomposed tissue. You peer through the glass wall as the technician runs preliminary presumptive tests. Breathe a sentence. You lean against the corridor's wall, noticing how the station's flickering lights stutter rhythms that echo your own heartbeat. A voice calls your name. You turn to see a detective clutching a thick file. Field interview transcripts. He says. He hands you the pages. Reports of a man in a grey trench coat seen near the phone booth around 9:40 p.m. The sketches vary. Some show a clean-shaven stranger, others a bearded man whose face dissolves into haphazard lines. Eyewitness sketch. Accuracy hovered around 60% in the 1970s, according to FBI studies, yet here those margins felt perilously thin. You leaf through the sketches, each one a ghost trapped on paper. You tap the counter and consider how memory warps under stress. How a child's last glimpse of her abductor might be fragmented into nightmares rather than clear testimony. Investigators still question whether relying on those sketches guided the hunt in the wrong direction. Breathe a sentence. You close the file and exhale, releasing months of stifled tension. You return to the table where Christine's jacket and shoe lie. You pause to place the Mary Jane back into its evidence bag, then fold the jacket with reverence. Each movement feels ritualistic, a ceremony for a childhood stolen before sunrise. Gathering your satchel, you step toward the evidence room's exit, but you pause at the threshold. Through the half-open door, you glimpse the sergeant conferring with a profiler's team just outside, gestures sharp, voices low. You catch fragments: behavioral escalation, linger times, signature component. They move like puppeteers, pulling at threads of intuition woven into the fabric of hard evidence. Investigators still question whether that blend of science and gut instinct helped or hindered. Some argue profiles focused searches. Others say they crafted a portrait so restrictive it blinded detectives to alternate suspects. You slip out of the room and into the station's foyer. The clerk is gone. The phones lie silent. You step into the cool April night, the temperature hovering just above freezing. Somewhere behind you, a call awaits: another child gone. Another night of searching. You flick on your flashlight and make your way to your car, the beam slicing through the dark like a beacon. You drive toward the next case file, unaware that each mile carries you closer to a truth that might never be claimed. You trace the map again. Pins, strings, color-coded flags, it's all there, but none of it leads anywhere. That's the story of the Oakland County child killer investigation. A case haunted not just by evil, but by chaos. you start to realize that somewhere, somehow, the truth got lost in the bureaucracy. At the height of the investigation, multiple agencies got involved: local police, county sheriffs, the Michigan State Police, the FBI, and with each new jurisdiction, the case became more tangled. Leads were duplicated, evidence misplaced, theories contradicted. Everyone had an angle, and no one wanted to let go of control. The task force, on paper, was unified. In reality, it was splintered. One retired detective later admitted in an interview that officers were competing to solve it first. Another source described it as turf war disguised as teamwork. The killer wasn't just hiding in shadows, he was hiding in the cracks of a broken system. You examine an old interagency memo. It's a relic, dated mid-1977. The tone is cold, almost passive-aggressive. One department accusing another of withholding key forensic updates. Attached is a list of unprocessed tips, dozens of them, some marked as high priority. All forgotten, buried in the footnotes, is a haunting phrase: "We need less ego and more eyes." And then you find it, the cluster. Over a 6-week period in early 1977. Tips came in from multiple witnesses reporting a suspicious vehicle seen near 2 different abduction sites. The descriptions were consistent: a blue gremlin with a white stripe. But here's the twist: each tip was logged by a different agency, and none of them were ever cross-referenced. It wasn't until years later that someone even noticed the match. Why? Because the data wasn't centralized. Investigators worked on paper, not databases. Leads were boxed away, quite literally, across different buildings. Some reports were lost in floods, others misfiled under unrelated cases. A missing folder might mean a missing child. You pause. This wasn't just an investigation. It was a failure in systems. The children didn't fall through the cracks. The cracks were the system. You dig further and find another detail. In one of the early cases, a local gas station attendant claimed to have seen a man with a child matching the victim's description the night before she disappeared. The man paid in cash. The clerk didn't think much of it until he saw the child's face on TV. He reported it, described the man, described the car, and then nothing. His statement never made it into the main file. His description never circulated. When he followed up, a detective allegedly told him, "We've already got enough noise." Noise. That's what leads became when they didn't fit the working theory. The working theory, by the way, kept changing. In March of 1977, investigators leaned toward a single killer. By May, some believed in a small ring. By September, internal memos floated the possibility of multiple copycats, or worse, intentional misdirection. That idea hits you hard. What if someone was deliberately feeding false tips? Not just a prankster, but someone involved. Someone trying to confuse the process, push attention away from certain locations, or waste resources on red herrings. One theory suggested that the killer or killers may have had ties to law enforcement, or someone with inside knowledge. It would explain how they stayed one step ahead, how they knew just how long to keep a victim before the public boiled over, how the drops were timed with media cycles. Too many coincidences felt choreographed. There's a chilling passage in one report. Victim number 3 located 48 hours after public pressure campaign. Suspect may be monitoring news. You remember that campaign? Parents marched. Flyers covered lampposts. News anchors pleaded with the killer directly. And just like that, within 2 days, the body was found. Almost like a response. You want to dismiss it. You want to believe in coincidence. But patterns keep repeating, even in how the remains were positioned. Victims weren't just left, they were placed. Face-up shoes, clean. Eyes closed, as if staged. As if someone wanted to send a message. But to who? That's when another thread appears, quiet, buried under headlines. In the months before the first abduction, there had been rumors, anonymous tips about a pedophile ring operating in the greater Detroit area. Connected individuals, money, influence, nothing proven. Number. Arrests made. But certain names pop up again, in tips, in hushed interviews, in theories too dangerous to publish. One of them was allegedly a known figure in local business circles. Another had ties to a private boarding school. All were eventually cleared, or so the reports said. But the fact they were considered, all that they kept being mentioned, it adds weight. What if this wasn't a lone wolf? What if the real reason the case fell apart is because someone wanted it to? You lean back, not because you're done, but because you realize the next move isn't about looking deeper into the evidence, it's about looking at who had access to it. Sometimes the truth isn't buried, it's filed, neatly, deliberately, under the wrong name. You emerge from the sterile confines of the precinct and find yourself enveloped by a sea of candlelight on the front lawn of the Oakland County courthouse. Hundreds of neighbors clutch wax-tipped vigil candles, their flames bobbing in the 40 degrees Fahrenheit night like fireflies caught in a jar. Banners declare, "Bring them home and justice for our children," their bold letters smeared with melting wax. You press into the crowd, the hush broken only by the whisper of flickering flames and the occasional sniffle in 1938. Candlelight vigils became a fixture of American public mourning after the memorials for the victims of the St. Valentine's Day massacre, demonstrating the power of communal grieving to galvanize social action. Tonight, that tradition finds new urgency in suburban Michigan. Investigators still question whether these gatherings helped direct valuable tips to police or simply amplified the collective dread, burying credible leads in a chorus of speculation. You scan the rows of faces, parents clutching children close, teens with hastily scrawled posters, elderly couples entwined like lifelines. A mother 2 rows ahead rocks a plush teddy bear against her chest, its fur matted by tears and snow. You notice one volunteer pressing hot cocoa into shivering hands, her breath forming clouds that drift upward like prayers. A local pastor steps onto a makeshift stage, his collar catching the candlelight. He clears his throat and speaks. "We stand here in solidarity, refusing to let fear define our nights or silence our children's laughter." His voice quivers, carrying the weight of decades-old sermons, yet freshly charged with community. Resolve. Fringe whispers claim that the pastor once hosted seances to comfort grief-stricken families, an unorthodox practice never officially sanctioned by the diocese. Breathe a sentence. You inhale the sweet mix of melting wax, pine from evergreen wreaths laid at the courthouse steps, and the bracing tang of winter air. The vigil's organizers pass around a petition demanding a dedicated cold case unit, reminding you that by the early 1970s, only a handful of major cities maintained permanent cold case squads. Detroit was not one of them. Historical records note that by 1975, Chicago and Los Angeles had established such divisions. Yet Michigan's child murder cases were still lumped into general homicide dockets. Investigators still question whether institutional inertia stalled, resources that might have cracked this case sooner. You feel a tap on your shoulder. Turning, you find a reporter from the Detroit Free Press holding a microphone. Your thoughts on the task force's progress? She asks, voice urgent beneath her parka's hood. You hesitate. Every word you offer could tip the scale toward hope or despair. I believe, you begin, voice steadied by the candle's flicker, that the community's unity here is our strongest tool. These voices, these lights, they remind the investigators that we will not rest until our children are safe. You note the reporter's pen flying across her notebook as you speak. Investigators still question whether embracing public pressure risked sensationalizing the crimes, drawing carnival-style curiosity rather than sober analysis. Yet, without this spotlight, some families fear their pleas would have evaporated into the night. Breathe a sentence. You step aside to let two uniformed officers carry forward a wreath of white chrysanthemums, its ribbon embroidered with each victim's name. The crowd lowers its candles in unison, and the hush deepens into a palpable heartbeat. A grieving father rises from the second row, his shoulders hunched beneath a wool overcoat. He grips a small frame containing his daughter's school photos. Sarah doesn't deserve to be forgotten, he says, voice wavering. His words hanged for a beat, long enough for dozens of phone calls to form behind them, dozens of hands clasped in solidarity. You close your eyes, picturing Sarah's smile as though it were your own memory. Breathe a sentence. You let the moment wash over you, a wave of sorrow and determination. Suddenly, a choir of voices rises up, singing a minor key hymn that echoes against the courthouse's stone facade. Each note vibrates through the snow-coated ground, resonating with families who refuse to let silence swallow their grief. You feel tears prick at your eyelid stairs, not only for the lost children, but for the fragile promise of safety that once bound this community together in 1977. Similar vigils in New York following the Son of Sam killings prompted the creation of informal neighborhood patrols that foreshadowed today's organized watches. Yet here in Oakland County, no one knows which vigil might spark the breakthrough. Investigators still question whether collective action emboldened the killer to retreat deeper underground or provoked him to strike again out of spite. You open your eyes and watch the candles drift atop the fall breeze, their flames dancing like tiny testimonies. A volunteer hands you a white ribbon bearing Mark, Jill, Christine, Timothy's names. You tie it to your coat zipper, feeling its weight as both an emblem and a burden. Breathe a sentence. You press your palm against the cold edge of your candle, warming your fingertips against the cold metal. The vigil concludes with a moment of silent reflection. No chants, no speeches, just the collective breathing of a community united in heartache. You stand among them, candle in hand, every face illuminated by the same fragile flame as the crowd disperses. You linger at the steps, watching footprints fill with drifting snow, erasing the evidence of hundreds who stood here tonight. Justice feels as elusive as those footprints. Yet, as you tuck the ribbon inside your coat, you resolve not to let the vigil's fire fade into black. You lower your candle, extinguishing its flame with a steady breath, and step away from the courthouse into the night. Behind you, the community's vigil recedes, but its spirit carries you forward into the next phase of the hunt for a nightmare that has yet to end. You navigate the slick cul-de-sac where Timothy King's bicycle lies abandoned beneath a flickering street lamp, its red frame scraped and dented as if something fierce collided with innocent play. Tonight is March 16th, 1977, almost a year after Mark's vanishing. The chill in the air feels bone deep, as if winter itself conspired with the killer. You're listening to 102 Hours, where stories don't just get told. They come alive in the dark. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to 102 Hours. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let 102 Hours guide you into tonight's journey. By the early 1970s, the concept of missing children as a category had only recently taken root. Police departments traditionally logged them under general runaways or family disputes. So Timothy's disappearance stretched resources already frayed by 4 prior abductions. Investigators still question whether this administrative lag prevented critical coordination before he vanished. You step over caution tape and crouch beside the bike. The handlebar grips are scuffed, and the front wheel spokes glint under your flashlight, each reflecting shards of memory children pedaling toward friends, parents waving from doorsteps. A single fingerprint was lifted from the saddle's metal post, small and smudged, its pattern nearly lost to time. Fringe rumors whisper that the killer pressed his own fingerprint onto the seat afterward, taunting investigators with a false lead that never panned out. Breather sentence. You pause to let the quiet settle, listening to snowflakes hiss against your hood. You glance toward the row of grey duplexes where Timothy lived with his mother. A neighbor's porch light spills a narrow column of gold, but no figures move within. You imagine Timothy pedaling here after school, laughter trailing behind him, unaware that this ride would be his last. Then the hush of an engine too soft for modern cars. More like an idling tractor rumbles through the gloom. Investigators later noted that unusual motor noise on that street. Some said it was farm equipment. Others claimed it was a customized muffler, but no definitive source was ever found. Investigators still question whether the sound masked the killer's own approach or served as a signal to an accomplice waiting in the shadows. You follow the thin tracks leading away from the bike, footprints pressed into the slush, 2 sets merging, then diverging. One set appears child-sized, almost ghostly. The other, undeniably adult. You crouch and trace the adult print, feeling its depth heavy, deliberate, as though the killer paused to survey his work. In 1975, Michigan State Police began experimenting with luminol sprays to detect washed-away bloodstains, but smaller departments had yet to adopt the technique. You imagine a luminol-soaked flashlight revealing hidden traces beneath the wheel well drips that might have told the true story of what happened here. Investigators still question whether earlier adoption of such methods could have yielded evidence before grime and salt ate it away. Breather sentence. You lean back against the curb and let your flashlight's beam rest on the bike's twisted chain, its links stiff with frozen grease. A patrol car arrives, headlights slicing through the snow. 2 officers exit, one holding a rolled-up flyer bearing Timothy's smiling face. You accept the flyer and study it, a snapshot from last summer. Sunlit yard, backyard swing set, Timothy's wide grin. The paper is damp, edges crinkled, its ink bleeding into the fibers. You snap a photo for the case file, careful to angle your camera so the flyer's water stains won't obscure his features. Crime scene photography guidelines from the mid-1970s emphasized framing focus, yet many field officers lacked formal training. Investigators still question whether inconsistent photos, documentation weakened the visual record of this scene. One officer kneels, examining the snow, "Look here, the adult Prince Veer," he murmurs, through that gap in the hedges. You shine your light on the boundary where manicured lawn meets wild undergrowth. A narrow path, barely more than a hoofprint track, winds into the thicket. You step forward, brush parting to reveal a shallow depression in the earth, the impression of a vehicle tire. Investigators later speculated that the killer used a small utility vehicle, perhaps a maintenance buggy from a local golf course, to ferry children unseen. Fringe lore even claims a landscape supply company reported a stolen motorized cart that week, though no record survives. Investigators still question whether such stolen equipment ever entered evidence logs. Breather. Sentence. You kneel and brush away snow to expose coarse rubber treads, each ridged line cut sharply, unlike any standard car tire. You bag a section of tread for later comparison, but sense how time will turn this into yet another cold lead. Above you, the moon breaks through ragged clouds. You hear the crack of distant wood, snapping, maybe a branch, maybe something more sinister. Your flashlight beam snaps toward the noise. At the edge of vision, you catch a flash of movement, dark shapes slipping between tree trunks. Your heart hammers as adrenaline floods your veins. You break into a run, boots skidding on ice. The shape darts ahead, vanishing around a bend. You follow the footprints, stumbling over roots, branches clawing at your coat. The forest seems to contract around you, each tree a sentinel guarding the killer's secret. Investigators still question whether following those fleeting tracks was smartsome. Argued he laid false trails to distract pursuers, leading them away from hidden caches of evidence or victims still alive. You swallow hard, recalling the urgency you felt chasing echoes in the dark. Breathe a sentence. You stop, chest heaving, and force yourself to listen. Only the wind whining through bare branches and the distant echo of sirens. You collect yourself and shine your light across the path. Nothing but indented slush and displaced needles. You bend to photograph the tracks, the image capturing 3 prints: a child's sneaker, an adult's boot, and the odd utility tire mark. The camera's flash blinds you momentarily, and when your vision clears, you sense you're not alone. Voice calm and clipped, murmurs behind you, "You shouldn't be here." You whirl, flashlight swinging, but see only the deepening shadows. You swallow, and the tan overcoat of a stranger emerges, the figure's hands tucked in pockets, eyes glinting. You step backward, mind racing. The voice continues, "Go home, before you get hurt." Investigators still question whether eyewitness sightings of a similar stranger were credible or merely figments born of stress. Each report differed. Some said he wore a fedora, others a knit cap. Some claimed a limp, others broad shoulders. You realize memory's fragility under fear's glare. Breathe a sentence. You steady your breathing and mirror his to appear calm amid the tension crackling between you. He steps closer, the hem of his coat brushing snow. "This ends tonight," he says. His tone could be promise or threat. You can't tell which. You shine the torch on his face too much. Shadow, not enough detail. Without warning, he turns and melts into the thicket. You call after him, but only the wind answers. You swallow again, imagining the killer's laugh you'll never hear. Your radio crackles. "Officer down by the creek," someone voices urgently. You click it off and pocket it. Duty calls, but you hesitate. Your gaze drifts back to the footprints. Investigators still question whether the killer watched from the trees, gauging investigators' responses like a hawk. You rub your numb fingers and resolve to return at first light, search teams in tow, determined to trace every ridge, every fiber, every footfall until this nightmare yields its final secrets. You turn and disappear down the path, the flashlight beam bobbing as the forest swallows you whole. The deeper you go, the less certain everything becomes. This is where the case splinters, no longer a trail of evidence, but a forest of theories. Some well-founded, others speculative, all disturbing. One theory, persistent and chilling, is that the Oakland County child killer wasn't working alone. The team theory, as it came to be known, gained traction after law enforcement reviewed autopsy reports. The condition of the victims, their clothing, the precision of how they were cared for it, suggested planning, resources, even specialized knowledge. Many experts believe it would be difficult for a lone redditor to maintain such control across multiple victims over an extended period without making a critical mistake. Some point to the tight timeline of abductions and body placements, distances covered, victims bathed and redressed. One child was held for 19 days, another 4, 6. The logistics alone suggest either a dedicated facility or multiple people sharing roles. That's where the next theory emerges. A pedophile ring operating in the Detroit area, involving men with access to money, children, and legal resources. It's a disturbing idea, but it's one that never truly disappeared. In fact, over the years, multiple witnesses came forward, not just with sightings, but with stories. A former foster child claimed he was trafficked through a network of men who used front businesses to lure vulnerable boys. He described details, houses, cars, names. One name kept resurfacing. Christopher Bush. Bush was the son of a wealthy General Motors executive. He had to record multiple accusations of child molestation and was connected to a known pedophile named Gregory Green. In 1977, Bush was questioned by police. He failed a polygraph. He was in possession of disturbing materials, and yet he was never charged. Not in that case. Not in any. Many found that suspicious, especially because shortly after his interview, the killings stopped. Years later, in 2008, Christopher Bush's name surfaced again, this time as part of a Freedom of Information Act release. Inside those documents were photos taken at the time of his death. He had allegedly committed suicide in 1978. In those photos, investigators noted a peculiar detail: a sketch of a screaming boy pinned to the wall near his bed. The boy bore an eerie resemblance to one of the victims. A rope lay nearby. So did a shotgun. But here's where it gets murky. The crime scene was never processed as a homicide. No fingerprints were taken. No follow-up interviews were conducted. And the drawing, it was never officially catalogued as evidence. It's facts like these that fuel the theory that someone somewhere wanted things buried. Some believe Christopher Bush was silenced. Others believe he was protected. A few believe he was a pawn, expendable once his usefulness ended. There's also the matter of Mark Stebbins' autopsy, the first known victim. According to documents obtained by a local journalist, there were signs of sexual assault. But in public statements at the time, authorities said the results were inconclusive. This discrepancy has never been explained. Was it a mistake, a cover-up, a decision to shield the public from the full horror? A retired prosecutor once hinted, at deeper pressure, there were people who didn't want this case solved. That statement, ambiguous as it is, has sparked debate for decades. It leads into the final, most troubling theory, that the killer or killers had ties to law enforcement or the justice system. The rationale isn't just about evasion. It's about access, knowledge, knowing when to move, how long it would take to process a crime scene, which neighborhoods had patrol gaps, which children were most vulnerable. There are even allegations, never proven, that files were altered or evidence redirected to protect certain individuals. One whistleblower, under anonymity, claimed he was warned not to pursue a suspect too aggressively. You don't know who you're dealing with. There are no names attached, no paperwork to confirm, but these stories persist, passed down through investigators, journalists, and families still searching for closure. You realize the tragedy here isn't just about the children lost, it's about the chances lost, the trails that might have led somewhere had they not been erased, obscured, or dismissed. You step back and try to connect it all. The sketch on Bush's wall, the polygraph, the abrupt end to the murders, the disjointed agencies, the ring theory, the whispers of cover dash up, and one phrase keeps returning, too convenient to ignore, too unproven to indict. That's the limbo this case lives in, a place where every thread might be the key, or might be nothing, where truth was always just out of reach and, maybe, someone intended it that way. You return to the task force's clotted bullpen at dawn. The shift change dissolving the previous night's tension into fresh weariness. Desk phones ring with hoarse urgency, each caller more agitated than the last. You trudge past rows of tired detectives and sliding glass windows plastered with confessions, wanted flyers, marveling at how desperation has become as common as the coffee stains on their case files. In the wake of high-profile cases, like the Manson family murders, false confessions surged in the 1970s, some driven by guilt, others by a craving for attention, turning every tip line into a thicket of dead ends and deceit. Investigators still question whether sifting through these fraudulent admissions distracted from genuine leads or merely underscored the public's desperation for closure. You pause at a cubicle where two officers hunch over crumpled pages, labeled Confession Number 47. One reads aloud, "I did it because he laughed at me. I buried her under the old bridge." The handwriting wobbles between capital and lowercase letters, as though the writer fought to maintain composure. You step forward, brushing a strand of hair from your face, and study the slip of paper. Details are scanned to no victim's name. No location, specifics yet. The reader marked it urgent enough for a midnight drive to headquarters. Fringe rumors whisper that some of the confessions were orchestrated by the killer himself, feeding false narratives to taunt investigators. No hard evidence supports that theory, but the notion chills you. A sadist scripting his own legend under the guise of amateur tipsters. Breathe a sentence. You stretch your arms overhead, feeling every vertebra pop free of tension. Then let your shoulders slump as exhaustion seeps back in. At a nearby desk, an operator fields a call from a trembling voice claiming to have seen the eyes of the predator in a reflection on a gas station window. The caller insists they recorded their confession on a cassette, promising to deliver it within the hour. The operator's eyes flicker with hope before she sighs and adds the note to a growing stack. Audio tape promised. Historical studies of the Son of Sam case showed police received over 200 false leads in the first month alone. Many of them elaborate fabrications designed to capitalize on media frenzy evidence that fame can breed imitation. Investigators still question whether publicizing each debunked confession inadvertently trained would-be hoaxers to craft better lies. You shuffle to a whiteboard marked Potential Confessions. Its columns subdivided into plausible, implausible, and pending verification. The plausible list contains only 2 entries, one from a former convict in a neighboring county, later disproven by alibi. The other from a local woman who admitted lying to deflect suspicion. From her ex-husband, the margins bear scrawled notes: DNA negative, vehicle doesn't match, time frame impossible. Investigators still question whether a truly guilty party might have used the confusion of false confessions as camouflage, slipping his own statements into the swirl to muddy the waters when they counted on pinpoint precision. You consider how cunning that would be, weaponizing public hysteria to evade detection. Breathe a sentence. You step back and run your palm across the dry erase board, the marker's stale smell lingering like an unwelcome promise. A detective sidles up, holding a plastic bag. Inside is a torn piece of paper. I know where she is. It's accompanied by a matchbook from a now closed diner in Royal Oak. You crumple the matchbook in your fist, recalling how investigators once followed similar crumbs into networks of underground informants that led nowhere. You slip the pair into your coat pocket, wary of adding another dead-end artifact to the case. Nearby, a junior officer tugs at your sleeve. "Ma'am, you need to hear this." He presses a tape into your hand, labeled Confession 102. Verified. You excuse yourself and retreat to a small interview room. Inside, you slot the cassette into a recorder. The voice that crackles forth is measured, almost controlled. "I saw her pull the scarf. I watched as the confession trails off into static." You rewind the tape and listen again. There's something familiar about the cadence, a professional ease that turns your stomach. Before the officer can finish his breathless recounting, you press stop and eject the tape. "This is someone reading a report," you say flatly. "It's not a confession." Investigators still question whether sophisticated hoaxes studied case transcripts and rehearsed their lies to perfection. An unsettling prospect that no interrogation technique could fully guard against. Breathe a sentence. You step out into the hallway, where the glow of fluorescent lights seems harsher after the cramped darkness of the interview room. On a corkboard labeled Verified Leads, a single printed photograph stands pinned beneath the header, a mugshot of a man whose DNA profile was later matched to fibers at one crime scene. That name, never publicly revealed, remains the case's lone thread of credence. Yet even that lead faltered when the suspect's prints were absent from other scenes. Historical archives note that in the Pattyhurst kidnapping, false confessions and coerced statements hampered the search until physical evidence finally broke the case in Hyde Park. Investigators still question whether a more disciplined approach, triaging confessions with stricter standards, could have accelerated the breakthrough here. You close your eyes and lean your forehead against the cool wall. The bustle of the bullpen fades, replaced by the hum of unanswered questions. Each false confession feels like a blow to the investigation's psyche, eroding divine faith in the justice system's infallibility. Fringe theories suggest that the killer monitored the bulletin boards of false leads, adapting his methods to avoid replication and, perhaps even cataloging confessions in his own dark archive. Investigators still question whether tracing the origin of hoax, mailings, or cassette shipments might unmask an unseen puppeteer. Breathe a sentence. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs as though drawing in clarity. Gathering your satchel, you slip the verified confession into a secure evidence locker. You glance at the task force's motto emblazoned on a worn banner above the bullpen: "Find the truth." It feels both hopeful and ironic. As you exit the watchful eyes of the detectives, you vow to treat every future confession with cautious rigor, want a potential doorway to truth or a labyrinth of misinformation. Outside, the dawn's pale. Light filters through frosted windows, promising a new day of sifting fact from fiction in a case that refuses to yield its secrets. You settle into a stiff metal chair in the county archives room, its fluorescent buzz a constant drone against the hush of filing cabinets that tower overhead like silent sentinels. Before you lies a stack of lead follow-up reports, handwritten. Notes, annotated maps, tattered newspaper clippings, a fragile testament to hopes kindled and dashed across decades. Outside, a pale winter light filters through frosted windows, casting everything in a muted silver glow that feels suspended between memory and oblivion by the late 1970s. Cold case units were emerging across the country. New York City established its first in 1978, spurred by the tenement-slaying files, but Oakland County wouldn't dedicate resources to its unsolved child murders until the mid-1980s. Investigators still question whether that delay allowed crucial evidence to degrade. Beyond hope, you leaf through a report dated 1985, where a young detective revisited Mark Stebbins' frozen jacket cuff, requesting a new fiber analysis with advanced microscopy. The request was denied. The fiber sample had been accidentally discarded during lab consolidation. Fringe rumors insist the sample was shelved under the wrong case number and still survives in a dusty box somewhere. But if so, no one has located it. Breathe a sentence. You push aside the report and stretch your arms, feeling the creak of your spine echo the case's age. Next, you examine a 1992 memorandum detailing a tantalizing DNA breakthrough. A vial labeled blood flecks, Exhibit B2, was retested using early PCR methods, yielding what investigators hoped was a partial profile. Yet that profile produced no matches in law enforcement databases of the day. The memo's handwritten margin reads, "Store for future tech." That vial, too, vanished by 1995 during a courthouse renovation. Investigators still question whether that lost vial could now hold the key to the killer's identity. You pause on a news clipping from 2001 announcing the launch of the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, coldest, a national database that, for the first time, enabled cross-state genetic comparisons. The article quotes a Michigan State Police captain promising that all backlogged samples would be entered within 6 months, but follow-up reports reveal key child abduction samples were excluded. Investigators still question whether bureaucratic oversight sidelined the very profiles most critical to solving this case. Breather sentence. You let your gaze drift to a faded missing persons cold case unit poster hanging crookedly on the far wall, its edges curled and yellowed. A 2010 file catches your oddjar memorandum from a retired detective who claimed to have discovered an untested blue fiber in a private collection. He suggested comparing it to the killer's hypothesized workshop materials, speculated to include upholstery from a 1970 Plymouth Duster. That fiber was never catalogued. The detective's notes describe it only in vague terms. Royal blue, coarse weave. Investigators still question whether tracing that material to a specific auto upholstery shop could have placed the killer behind the wheel. You rub your temples. These mischances accumulate, stacking like bricks in a wall of frustration. Untested clue, a silent accusation against the system's failures. Breathe a sentence. You glance down at your satchel, where the print card marked C7 rests next to an envelope of fiber scraps. the only surviving artifacts you can directly vouch for at the bottom of the stack. You find a report dated 2020. A volunteer genealogist tentatively linked one partial DNA profile to a large family tree in Oakland County. The analyst wrote, "Possible great-uncle match test living descendants," yet the proposal never advanced. The file notes simply state, "Funding not approved." Investigators still question whether the genealogical approach, now proven in other cold cases, could have cracked this one wide open if embraced earlier. Breather sentence. You exhale slowly, imagining what's hiding in those missed opportunities. You rise and push aside the chair, its legs scraping the linoleum like fingernails on a chalkboard. At the far end of the room, an open cabinet reveals plastic bins labeled. By year, you pull one marked 1976 and find a sealed envelope labeled Woodward Corridor Tips. Inside, a tangle of index cards lists dozens of unpursued sightings, reports of a man wearing reflective safety stripes on his coat, of a vehicle idling with its engine off near playgrounds, and of scattered children's toys mysteriously appearing on front lawns. Many cards are faded, some water-stained, but a few names still stand out. Fringe law holds that some of those index cards were removed by a single clerk who privately believed the killer had held a childhood birthday party. Under one of the street lamps, a theory deemed too outlandish to follow. Investigators still question whether those cards ever made it to supervisory review or were quietly archived away. Breather sentence. You sort through the cards, noting one oddly specific entry. Witness saw reflective jacket glint under moonlight. Asked if they were police. Man shook head and smiled before walking away. That entry had never been cross-checked with officers on duty that night. Your phone buzzes. A text from a current task force detective. New record search. Composite tip from 1977 hound dog. Walker saw a man carrying a child near Union Lake. You hail the archivist, requesting that folder next. As she fetches it, you sit on an overturned box, feeling its rough cardboard rind against your glove. Finally, you hold the folder. Inside lies a handwritten note. Union Lake sighting, January 1977. Check ice fishing huts. At the bottom, a name, E. Thompson. No one ever traced Thompson beyond a cursory interview. Investigators still question whether that lead was buried to protect witness privacy or simply forgotten amid the avalanche of tips. Breather sentence. You rise, ready to leave the archives, but pause at the doorway. The afternoon sun has shifted, painting the room's dust motes in golden beams. It's a fleeting moment of beauty amid the gloom, a reminder that time moves on, even when justice stands still. Clutching the new lead, you step back into the corridor, resolved to bring that Union Lake tip into the light. The cold case is anything but cold in your hands. The room is quiet now, quieter than it's been in hours. You sit back, eyes glazed, ears still echoing with the names of the lost. Timothy, Christine, Jill, Mark, for children, gone. And not just gone, but stolen. Taken from sidewalks, from doorways, from the safety nets of their tiny routines. A part of you wants to move on, to shake it off, say it's just another cold case. But you can't, not anymore, because the story doesn't stop in 1977. It doesn't politely retire into the past. No, this one lingers like old smoke in the carpet, like the whine of a refrigerator you don't notice until everything else goes still. And when it lingers, it grows. In the decades since the killings, something stranger has emerged. Not just pain or grief, but obsession. From online forums to pop-up documentaries, Reddit threads tangled in color-coded theories, to shadowy basements where cold case junkies draw maps in red yarn. Everyone seems to have their version of the truth, their theory, their definitive answer, and yet, no justice. You glance at your phone. There are entire YouTube channels dedicated to this. One case, hundreds of thousands of views. Comment sections turned into confessionals. People claiming to be relatives of investigators, whispering names no one has heard before. One account insists the killer was a police officer. Another swears it was someone famous, a failed comedian, a real estate agent, a former state senator. There's a post long since deleted where someone simply wrote, "He's still out there." You feel that chill again, crawling up your arms. In 2007, everything briefly caught fire again. That's when DNA evidence linked a hair found on Christine Mihalik to a convicted child molester named James Vincent Gunnels. Gunnels was no stranger to investigators. He'd been associated with another person of interest, Christopher Bush, that name again. The man with child pornography found in his Bloomfield Hills home. The man who committed suicide days after being questioned. But Gunnels was still alive, still denying involvement, still under suspicion. Investigators still question whether Gunnels was just a pawn or something far more sinister. He admitted the hair was his, but how it ended up on Christine, he couldn't explain. Claimed it must have transferred indirectly. A couch, maybe. A borrowed coat. All very convenient. But it was enough to make prosecutors take another look at the files. Suddenly, evidence bags were being reopened. Old tape reels were played again. But still no charges, no resolution, and so the doubt grew louder. Here's a lesser-known fact. In the early 1980s, a psychic came forward, claiming to have seen the killer's face in a dream. Police, running out of leads, actually brought her in. She described a 2-story house with blue shutters and a garden gnome in the yard. Investigators followed up. There was a house that matched barely, but it led nowhere, still to this day. Some amateur sleuths online swear the psychic was closer than anyone wants to admit. You smirk, but only for a second, because part of you doesn't think it's funny. You think it's desperate. People clutching at anything, even ghosts by now. It's not just about the killer, it's about the system. The silence, the bureaucratic shuffle of evidence. Families were told not to talk to the press. Leads disappeared. Files went missing. In 2013, a former prosecutor accused the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office of burying key evidence. She said she was told to back off, to stop pushing. She DIDN, single quotes. Her name was Jessica Cooper. And her public feud with another prosecutor, Karen McDonald, became one more twisted layer in the saga. Now it wasn't just about who killed the children, but who failed them, who protected someone they shouldn't have, who chose silence over justice. You feel it, don't you? That itch at the back of your skull. That gnawing need to rewind every piece of this, to dig into every report, to Google every name. That's what this case does to people. It draws them in and doesn't let go. It feeds off uncertainty. There's a term for this in true crime circles, the sinkhole effect. It's when a cold case becomes so deep, so wide, so riddled with contradictions and half-truths, that it swallows even the most rational minds. People don't solve it, they vanish into it. You remember something you read once, Most serial killers either escalate until they're caught or they stop because they die, are imprisoned, or get too scared. But this killer, he just faded. No confirmed murders after 1977. No note, no ego flare, no calling card. It's like he evaporated. And maybe that's the most disturbing detail of all. Some say he's dead. Others say he was protected by money, by politics, maybe even by blood. A few even whisper about connections to North Fox Island. That terrible place off Lake Michigan where wealthy men allegedly flew in to abuse children far from prying eyes. Some of the same names show up in both cases. Coincidence? Investigators still don't know if the Oakland County child killings were the work of one man, or a ring, or something even darker. That's the question that haunts them, that haunts you. Because what if it wasn't one monster? What if it was a network, a system, a sickness shared in secret? You exhale hard. You need a second, so you pause, rub your eyes, stand up. But it follows you. Every detail, every whisper, every unfinished sentence. You were never supposed to care this much, but you do. You didn't know them. You didn't grow up in Michigan. But now, you carry them in your bloodstream. In your breath, you look out the window. Somewhere out there, someone knows the truth. Maybe they're alive, maybe they're scared, or maybe they're watching, and maybe they've been watching this whole time. You retrace the tire tracks and footprints back to that final stretch of isolated county road where Timothy King's body was discovered. The wind having stripped the pines bare and left only skeletal branches against the grey sky. The asphalt here curves gently, disappearing into a hollow where the underbrush grows thick and impenetrable. It's March 18th, 1977, 2 days after Timothy vanished down this spot. Ringed by ancient oaks, has become the site of your most somber return. The hush presses in on you as you step onto the frost-crusted pavement. Your boots crackle, each step a staccato reminder of how close you are to the edge of everything. You bend to examine the frozen ground where investigators found his small frame just off the shoulder, half concealed by thawing snow. There, a single, twisted leaf clings to a smear of dried brown residue. You kneel and pick it gently, noting its veins trace a perfect silhouette of innocence lost. Historical records show that by the late 1970s, forensic anthropology was emerging as a discipline experts could approximate time of death by analyzing soft tissue degradation even in cold climates. Yet in Oakland County, no anthropologist was ever called, leaving only patrol officers to estimate Timothy's final hours by the stiff angle of his limbs. Investigators still question whether a trained forensic anthropologist might have narrowed the window for suspect movements. You stand, pressing your gloved hands into your coat pockets, and let your gaze drift down the road where Michael Grizz's patrol car once sat idling. The headlight beam cut a trench through the night's black, illuminating the silent tableau of a child's tragedy. Now, only the faded outline of tire imprints and boot marks remains nature's slow erasure. Fringe whispers hold that on the 1-year anniversary of Timothy's death, local teenagers reported hearing children's laughter echoing along this road, a dusk and eerie phenomenon that vanished when a lone patrol officer pursued the sound into the woods. No official report documented it, yet it persists in conversations around cold case bars. Breathe a sentence. You inhale the sharp tang of fir resin and exhale, letting the forest's breath mingle with your own. You retrieve your camera and snap. A wide shot of the curve. cautious to include the broken guardrail where officers placed a small memorial wreath, white carnations tied with a navy ribbon. You remember that in similar child murder investigations, roadside memorials sometimes become unofficial shrines, drawing scribbled notes and small toys from strangers paying silent tribute. Investigators still question whether those tokens could have conveyed hidden messages or simply offered catharsis to a grieving community. You step past the guardrail and into the undergrowth, where the snow has melted to reveal a dark patch of earth, the precise spot where Timothy fell. The ground is damp, the soil spongy beneath your boot. You crouch and let your fingers trace the share of a drag mark, deep gouges that suggest the body was pulled rather than placed. It's a detail overlooked in many modern cases, yet here it held the key to suspect behavior, the killer's unwillingness to relinquish control even after death. Historical lore notes that drag marks in the Milwaukee cannibal case of the late 1970s provided vital clues to the killer's path, but nobody applied similar crime scene reconstruction here. Investigators still question whether advanced mapping techniques might have charted a clandestine path to the killer's hideaway. Breathe a sentence. You shift your weight, letting the forest's shadows stretch long across your footsteps ahead. You glimpse the weathered leg of a broken bicycle frame buried beside a mossy log, the remnants of a discarded children's toy long since claimed by rot. You kneel and clear away debris to reveal a fragment of red paint that matches Timothy's bike. You place it in an evidence bag, careful not to disturb the moss's delicate strands. As you rise, you notice a glint among the roots, the metal clasp of a small music box, its intricate filigree dulled by grime. You unearth it gingerly and wind its rusted key. The tinny notes of twinkle, twinkle, little star sputter through the cold air, a cruel echo of lost childhood. Investigators still question whether that music box was Timothy's own possession or a macabre planting by the killer to mock the hunt. Breathe a sentence. You tuck the music box into your coat and let its melancholic tune fade into the hush. You walk back onto the road and face the direction from which you came. The landscape stretches empty, no lights, no movement, only the distant hum of an unseen highway. The isolation here is absolute, as though the world beyond these trees has ceased to exist. Historical data indicates that most long cold cases hinge on one last piece of evidence: a forgotten hair sample, an overlooked witness. Here, the trail feels extinguished. Investigators still question whether an untested item, like that scrap of cloth clutched by Mark's jacket or the lost DNA vial from Christine's scarf, might yet bridge past and present. You shine your flashlight along the pavement's edge, watching the beam tremble against the dark. The wind picks up, carrying snow in swirling eddies. Each flake seems to whisper a name. Breathe a sentence. You close your eyes and let the names roll through your mind. Mark, Gil, Christine, Timothy 4. Light snuffed out too soon. You slip the evidence bag onto your satchel. The fragments of childhood heavier than any burden you've carried. The curve in the road calls you to look deeper, but you hesitate, knowing that journey may lead you into a darkness from which there is no return. Investigators still question whether this silent curve will ever yield its final secret, or if the killer remains an unseen passenger, riding these roads under cover of snow and shadow. You lower your flashlight and step back onto the pavement. The night closes in, but within you burns a steadfast flame, a promise unbroken by time or terror. You lean against the guardrail, the cold metal seeping through your coat, and let the story's edges soften. The howling wind becomes a distant sigh, and the forest's shadows retreat beyond your vision. Here, in the hush of resigning daylight, you breathe out the weight of years spent chasing ghosts through snow. Slowly, your thoughts shift from dread to remembrance. Each name, Mark, Jill, Christine, Timothy, echoes in quiet reverence. Their laughter and fear now memories etched into time's tapestry. You acknowledge the ache of unanswered questions, then allow it to settle, like snowfall blanketing a frozen field. Your pulse slows. The forest seems less menacing, more a silent guardian holding secrets close. You brush a lock of hair from your face and close your eyes, picturing each child's smile, each small hand you never held. In that moment, the night's chill transforms into a gentle embrace. The road ahead remains dark, yet you sense a subtle shift, hope flickering like a lone lantern in a vast expanse. Even the faintest glow can guide you through the deepest winter. You whisper a promise to the night that you will carry their stories forward, that you will honor their lives with steadfast resolve. A distant owl calls, its voice a soft, lamenting whisper. You nod in gratitude, as though the forest itself offers comfort. The wind still stirs, but now it carries less menace and more understanding, an acknowledgement that even the coldest wounds can begin to heal. You take one final, lingering look at the curve in the road, now quiet under an endless sky. Turning away, you step forward with steady purpose, each footfall forging a path toward closure. Though justice remains elusive, your promise endures, to keep the candle burning wherever darkness lingers. Sweet dreams.